Hi students, we have to continue the lesson biodiversity and its conservation. And today's topic is about the conservation of biodiversity. Now, it is a must to just conserve the resources, including land, air, water, and other ecosystems. They must be safeguarded. They must be safeguarded through what is called careful planning and management as appropriate as per the principle of what we have Stockholm Declaration 1972. We have to follow the principle of what is called the Stockholm Declaration 1972 to conserve what we have the resources, the biodiversity. So the large scale loss of biodiversity and its what is called global impact because of loss of biodiversity, it has its impact on the globe. It makes conservation the need of the day, the need of the hour, the need of the year. So we must conserve because of the loss of biodiversity. That's the meaning for that. What's the definition of conservation? Conservation of biodiversity is one, protection and the scientific management of biodiversity. Protection and scientific management of biodiversity so as to maintain it at its optimum level, not being actually degraded. Optimum level, the normal level. And it derives sustainable benefits. Sustainable benefits means not being overexploited up to the level as the resource can provide. So as to just actually at a sustainable level, we have to get the benefits for the present generation as well as the future generation. So conservation of biodiversity is protection number one and scientific management of biodiversity so as to maintain it at its what is called optimal level. And we have to derive sustainable benefits, optimum normal benefits for the present and future generation. Normally, the aim of conservation is to protect the species from extinction and their habitats and also ecosystem from degradation. So the main aim of biodiversity conservation is to protect the species from extinction and their habitats and ecosystems from degradation. That's the main aim of conservation. What are the general strategies in conservation? What are the things to be followed? Number one, identify and protect threatened species. Identify and protect all threatened species. Number two, identify and conserve in protected areas what? The wild relatives of all economically important organisms. So we have to identify and conserve the wild relatives of all economically important organisms in protected areas. Then number three, identify and protect critical habitats. Those habitats used for feeding, breeding, nursing, and resting of each species. So these habitats should be normally identified and protected. Then, resting, feeding, and breeding places of the organisms or the species should be identified and protected. These places should be identified and protected. Those locations for resting the species, feeding the species, and breeding species. These places should be identified and protected. Now, air, water, and soil is conserved. So, all these things is normally conserved on priority basis, which is more important. Accordingly, we have to just conserve it, whether water is in priority. So, according to the situations, we have to give priority either to air or to water or to soil. And these things being conserved. Then you should implement the Wild Protection Act. So, Wildlife Protection Act should be implemented. These are the different strategies that should be followed in conservation of what we have, that is the biodiversity. There are two strategies in conservation. One is ex situ conservation, another one is in situ conservation. So, in situ, in the natural habitat, ex situ, man-made ecosystems. We have to actually just collect the animals from the wild and then providing the environmental conditions for the development, for the maintenance of animals. For example, Aringaranna Zoological Park in Vandalur, it is an example for ex situ conservation. Botanical gardens, they are also examples for ex situ conservation. In situ conservation, for example, the sanctuaries, national parks, biosphere reserve, the hotspots, etc. Now let's see the conservation strategies. What are the different methods adapted? There are two conservation strategies. One, in situ conservation. Conservation in the natural habitat. Conservation in the natural habitat is called in situ conservation, as such in the original habitat. Number two, ex situ conservation. Conservation outside the natural habitat. For example, I mentioned zoological park or cryopreservation. We have the botanical gardens, the gene bank, seed bank. They are being actually stored outside, conserved outside the natural habitat. That is called ex situ conservation. Now let's see the first one, in situ conservation. This is the conservation of genetic resources through their protection within natural, or man-made ecosystems. Natural or man-made ecosystems in which they occur. So conservation of genetic resources through their protection within natural or man-made ecosystems in which these organisms occur. It is conservation and protection of the whole ecosystems and its biodiversity at all levels. At all levels. That means species, genetic diversity, ecosystem diversity. That's the meaning. So, ecosystem and its biodiversity at all levels, genetic, ecosystem level, species level, in order to protect the threatened species. So, maximum number of species with the high levels of species richness are being conserved. Although we have all the biodiversity hotspots, hotspot is an example for that is in situ conservation. We already seen what is hotspot. Endemic species are rich. Although, suppose we are taking into consideration of all the biodiversity hotspots, together they cover less than 2% of the earth land surface, the total land surface. So, the total number, just actually the hotspots, not the number, the area that is being covered by the hotspot is less than 2% of the earth land. But if you're taking the number of species they harbor, they accommodate, is extremely high. So the area is less, but the number of endemic species, the hotspots, is extremely high. And protection of these hotspots normally could reduce the ongoing mass. The meaning for ongoing mass, extinction. So the conservation of all these hotspots reduce the extinction of species, that is called ongoing mass. So we have to go for the different types of in situ conservation. We have a number of protected areas, the biogeographical areas, together with what is called the biodiversity, in the form of national parks or sanctuaries, wildlife sanctuaries, biosphere, sacred groves, hotspots. These are all examples for in situ conservation. Hotspots, national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, biosphere reserves, and sacred groves. These are all the examples of protected areas coming under what we call in situ conservation. So we are talking about in situ conservation. So under the in situ conservation, we have to know something about the protected areas. What are protected areas? So these are biogeographical areas where biological diversity along with natural and cultural resources is just actually protected, maintained, and managed through legal procedures or through legal measures. So, biogeographical areas where biological diversity, along with natural and cultural resources, normally is maintained, first protected and maintained and managed through legal measures. So, the protected areas include the national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, community reserves. The community reserves include nothing but the sacred groves and the biosphere reserves. The hotspots also included under this category. Though here it's not mentioned, the hotspots also an example for in situ conservation. Now there is a monitoring center, worldwide monitoring center, concerned with wild conservation. So the Wild Conservation Monitoring Center has recognized about 37,000 protected areas worldwide. 37,000 protected areas, the hotspots worldwide. Now, out of this one, India has nearly about 771 protected areas, covering an area of 1,62,000, just actually 99 square kilometer. This is an area covered by what we call 771 protected areas. This is the area covered 1,62,099 square kilometer. Now, so I mentioned 771 protected areas, out of which at present the national parks include 104. There are about 104 national parks. Then wildlife sanctuaries are more in number, nearly about 544 wildlife sanctuaries. Then biosphere reserves, 18, all related to India. And the others coming under the category of what is called several sacred groves. Groves means nothing but actually a group of trees. That is in areas where we have cultural resources for religious purposes. I will mention later about what are sacred groves. Groves means a group of trees. Okay, this is about what we have. The biogeographical areas, the protected areas, which include the national parks, wildlife sanctuaries. Then we have biosphere reserve and sacred groves, and also the hotspots. Now we have to see one by one. The first one, national parks. Now under the in situ conservation, the first one is national parks. It is a natural habitat notified by what we call the state government to be constituted as a national park due to its ecological, faunal, floral, geomorphological, or what we call the zoological association of importance. Because of these features, they are considered as actually the national parks. So, in national parks, no human activity is permitted inside the park. No human activity is permitted, either extraction of the products, any forestry, work or development, all being normally stopped. No human activity is permitted inside the national park. One of the important features of what is called the national park, except there are certain activities permitted by, that is the chief wildlife warden of the state. Chief wildlife warden of the state, that person has given certain activities, a limited activity, very limited activity. So under the conditions given in chapter 4 of the Wildlife Protection Act, some conditions are given in chapter 4 and the Act, Wildlife Protection Act 1972. According to these conditions, they are allowed to enter into what we call the national parks. Otherwise, they could not. The people will not be allowed to enter into the national park. That's why I mentioned here, no human activities permitted inside the national park. Suppose we are comparing what we call the national park with the wildlife sanctuaries. So, limited wildlife activities. So, here no activity, no human activity. So, we have some human activities permitted inside the wildlife sanctuaries, but not here. That's the main difference between national park and wildlife sanctuaries. No human activities permitted. There we have limited human activities permitted. Some human activities permitted in wildlife sanctuaries. There is the main difference between what we call the national parks and wildlife sanctuaries. A few more characters about the national parks. I mentioned already there are about 104 existing national parks in India. covering an area of 40,501 square kilometer, which is normally 1.23% geographical area of the country. Only least percentage, 1.23% geographical area of the country. This was given by the National Wildlife Database August 2018. As per the National Wildlife Database 2018, we have what is called the statistical data. So, National Park is an area which is strictly reserved for the betterment of wildlife and biodiversity. No activities like, for example, the development, forestry, hunting, poaching, grazing, and also just we see that one cultivation are not permitted. These activities are not permitted, what I mentioned. Development, forest, poaching, that is hunting, grazing, and cultivation are not permitted. So there are large areas of scenic and what is called actually natural beauty maintained for several purposes. Maintained for scientific purposes, educational purposes, and recreational use. It's a large area of scenic and natural beauty. They are maintained for scientific research, educational research, and also recreational use, aesthetic pleasure. Now, they are not used for commercial extraction of resources. You cannot extract anything from that national park in the form of any materials. So that's why I mentioned here they are not used for commercial extraction, those of commercial use of resources. Okay, so we have one national park in India, Kasiranga National Park in Assam, which is normally concerned with the protection of one-horned rhinoceros. So now the one-horned rhinoceros is few in number. It is found in Kasiranga, that is National Park in Assam, where this one-horned rhinoceros is protected. Now we have a few, just also the national parks in Tamil Nadu, when it was established, then where is it present, and what is the name of the national park. Just about 5 examples, the national parks of Tamil Nadu. Now, Kasiranga National Park is a protected area for one-horned rhinoceros found in Assam. Now, here are some of the examples of national parks found in Tamil Nadu when they were established. Gindi National Park in Chennai, 1977. Then Gulf of Mannar Marine National Park. Gulf of Mannar Marine National Park. Gulf of Mannar Marine National Park, established in 1986 in Ramanathapuram and Tuticorin. Indira Gandhi National Park, that is in Annamalai, 1976, located in Coimbatore, that is the district. Then Mudumalai National Park, established in 1940, the oldest one, just in Nilgiris Hills. And then Mukurthi National Park, recently established in Nilgiris, 2001. So these are all the national parks found in Tamil Nadu. Now the second one, wildlife sanctuaries. What are wildlife sanctuaries? Any area other than area comprised of or comprised with any area other than area comprised with any reserve forest or territorial waters can be notified by the government to constitute as a sanctuary. So any area other than area comprised with any reserve, that is forest or territorial waters, can be notified by the government to constitute as a sanctuary if such area is of adequate ecological, faunal, floral, geomorphological, natural or zoological significance. Now this is actually created, the wildlife sanctuaries is for the purpose of threatened factual species. For the purpose of threatened factual species, the fact based on the fact. That's called the factual species. Now, unlike national parks, some restricted human activities are allowed inside the sanctuary area, where in national parks, no restricted, no activities normally allowed. Now, ecotourism is permitted as long as animal life is undisturbed. There are 544 existing wildlife sanctuaries in India, covering an area of just we see that 1,18,918 square kilometer, which is normally 3.62% of the geographical area of the country. Unlike the national park, which is only 1 point, you know that 1, 2, 3. Now, the data is given by the National Wildlife Database 2017. Now, what are sanctuaries? Once again, sanctuaries are tracts of land where wild animals and fauna can take refuge without being hunted and poached. They are taking refuge without being hunted and poached. Now we have activities can be allowed. What are the activities that can be allowed in sanctuaries, unlike the national parks? So activities like collection of forest products, regulated harvesting of timber, private ownership of land, all permitted. These are all other activities permitted. So we have already a number of activities allowed in sanctuaries but not in national parks. Now, one of the sanctuaries in India, famous for, even in southern India, in Kerala, Periyar Wildlife Sanctuary in Kerala. It is famous for Indian, that is what we have the tiger and Asiatic elephant. Now, a few examples of sanctuaries given in the book. Some of the wildlife sanctuaries in Tamil Nadu are given in the book, totally 5. Number 1, Vadandangal Lake Birds Wildlife Sanctuary. Established in 1936, location Changalbet district. That is what we have the area in terms of what is called district. Changalbet district as per the book. Then Mudumalai Wildlife Sanctuary, established in 1942, Nilgiris district. Now, Point Calimere Wildlife Sanctuary, the birds are arriving at large number of birds. So, 1967, Nagapattinam. Now we can call it as Vedarnyam. Now Indira Gandhi, so here Indira Gandhi, that is wildlife sanctuary, normally that is called as Annamalai in Coimbatore near Pollachi, and established in 1966. Now Mundandurai Wildlife Sanctuary, established in 1988, then located in Tirunelveli district. These are some of the wildlife sanctuaries in Tamil Nadu as per the book. Now the third one in in situ conservation method is Biosphere Reserve. Now it is an international designation by UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, for representing parts of, that is, natural and cultural landscapes extending over large area of terrestrial, coastal or marine ecosystems, or a combination of both. So that's provided by UNESCO. Now, it is normally designated, the Biosphere Reserve is designated to deal with certain aspects. Number 1, the conservation of biodiversity. It was designated to concern with what we have to deal with just the conservation of biodiversity. Number 2, economic and social development. And number 3, maintenance of associated cultural values. And this is for only was normally developed. Now, bioreserves are special environment for both people and nature normally, and are living examples of how human beings and nature can coexist, interdependence can coexist while respecting each other's needs. There is nothing but the interdependence supply. So it's a living example for human being and nature, how they can coexist. So interdependent supply, balancing the nature because of the coexistence of this one. How human beings and nature can coexist while respecting each other's needs. That's about the biosphere. So the biosphere was guided by, actually now it's guided by UNESCO and another one MAB, Man and Biosphere Program. It's guided by UNESCO and MAB, Man and Biosphere Program. Now in India, there are about 18 biosphere reserves. The Biosphere Reserve was established in 1986. The Biosphere Reserve program is normally guided by two organizations we can see: UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Scientific, that's cultural organization, and MAB, Man and Biosphere Program. Okay, the scheme Biosphere Reserve was implemented by the Government of India in 1986. The scheme of Biosphere Reserve was implemented in 1986 by the Government of India. I mentioned already there are about 18 biosphere reserves in India. Some of the examples are Agastya Malai, extending in three states: Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and Kerala. Number two, Nilgiris, extending in Tamil Nadu and Kerala. Then the Gulf of Mannar Biosphere Reserve, a marine biosphere reserve that is found in Tamil Nadu. These are some of the examples of biosphere reserve in what is called Tamil Nadu. Now, what are the differences between wildlife sanctuary and national park? Now, it refers to an area that provides protection and natural living conditions to the wildlife. Now, it provides protection to the entire plants and animals and landscape of that region, entire plants and animals. So, it's a vast area, large area, natural habitat, giving protection to the entire plants, animals, and landscape of that region. The main difference is in wildlife sanctuary, some restricted human activities are allowed inside the sanctuary area. Restricted, that is activities, human activities. For example, collection of what we have the forest product, regulated what we have the timber activity, etc. And but in the case of national park, it is highly restricted area and no human activity has been allowed. Highly restricted and no human activities permitted. No human activities permitted. Here human activities permitted, restricted human activities. But there is complete restriction. There is no human activity is normally allowed in national park. These are the main differences between wildlife sanctuary and national park. The last method of in situ conservation, sacred groves. Groves means a group of trees. A sacred grove or sacred woods also called are any group of trees that are of special religious importance, holy places like that, special religious importance to a particular culture, either Hindu culture or Christian culture or any other culture, to a particular culture, just normally followed by people. Now, sacred groves feature in various, for example, cultures. It features various actually cultures throughout the world. Now, the best examples for sacred groves, place related to the religious, actually, there is cultures. That is why it's called as actually sacred. Grows group of trees in an area and is linked with religious features, religious cultures. For example, Aravalli Hills of Rajasthan. Then the Western Ghats extending from Maharashtra to, that is what we call Kerala. Western Ghats extending from Maharashtra to Kerala. These are all examples of sacred groves. Sacred, what is called actually a religious place, and then groves, a group of trees. That is nothing but an area with the trees. That is called groves. So sacred grove or sacred woods or any grove of trees that are of special religious importance. That area is of special religious importance to a particular culture. So I mentioned about example Aravalli Hills of Rajasthan and then Western Ghats, even also Kasi, just actually related to. So these are all the different types of in situ conservation. We have to go for the ex situ conservation in the next class. Okay, thank you.